Peggy 18.
Of all of the FPS games coming to Xbox One this year, one stands out from the crowd, and that's Wolfenstein: The New Order from Machine Games and Bethesda. It is taking a single-player only route, basically getting rid of the multiplayer entirely, and sticking us on a frantic first-person adventure. And you know what, we've had hands-on time with it quite extensively. It's really, really fun. But one thing that's sort of a bit odd is how it is basically trying to merge these really serious and quite sort of touching in many places narrative points with just the absolute lunacy that Wolfenstein made its name on. So I think what we're looking at today is basically whether or not they need to do that. You know, Wolfenstein's always classically been a game where you basically fight like Nazis and like robot Hitler and what have you. Does it need to bother with a serious narrative to find success?
Probably not, really. If we're being perfectly honest about it, it could probably do with just being, embracing its silliness. That said, the guys at Machine Games, some of whom used to work at Starbreeze, are quite used to working in relatively silly areas, but adding a little bit of gravitas to that. If you think about the original Darkness game, for instance, you had a guy who had tentacles growing out of his back that would bite the hearts out of people to give him energy. But there was also a really touching scene where his girlfriend was killed. And so there's an interesting kind of balance they've been doing, even with the Riddick games as well, going way, way back. So yeah, it's do they need to do it? Probably not, but it's curious that they're trying.
Yeah, I mean, it's just there's a lot of very strange elements to these games. I mean, you can see one in this trailer, for example, where BJ, the sort of lead character, is on this train. They're trying to get into Berlin, and they get caught by these two sort of Nazi generals. And it's really weird because it's this really tense scene. It sort of almost reminds me of the Inglourious Bastards cafe scene where they're sort of trying to make it through that scenario without getting caught. And this whole time you've got like this really deadly woman with this weird like Aryan guy who she keeps grabbing his hand and putting it on her crotch and on her lap and stuff. All the while, like, it's got this really threatening vibe, and it's very, very odd.
But if Bond movies have taught us anything, it's you don't trust a person holding a golden gun. It's just a bad move.
No, that's totally true. And I mean, obviously, as you can see in this instance, there is a huge, like, Nazi robot standing behind them as well. So I guess it's
a
not
little
too
menacing,
serious.
yeah.
But, I think as long as Wolfenstein can keep a lid on the narrative and not just let it get too out of control, like, there is no robot Hitler this time around. For example, there's, a couple of creepy generals like we're seeing here. Then there's General Deathhead, who's like this weird sort of Dr. Death style surgeon. And, they are very larger-than-life villains.
Yeah.
It's just whether or not that overshadows the sort of, and, is swallowed by the ridiculous gameplay, where most of the time you're running around with, like, 2 shotguns, just blasting everything into, like, mists of blood for hours.
That's the tricky balance, is that the nature of how ridiculous the gameplay can and really should get, because it's Wolfenstein and we kind of expect that. It can tend to influence where the story goes and feel like they have to justify every decision with some kind of story element or something. What we're seeing so far would seem to suggest they're not doing that just yet, but there is that kind of worry of, will these slightly quieter moments in the game feel really out of place once you get the crazy mech battles going on?
Yeah, totally. Do you know what? Usually this wouldn't really worry us, I don't think. But it's because there's no multiplayer here, and it is just a straight, probably 8 to 10 hour campaign. It really needs to make sure those story beats are solid, otherwise, you're going to get a few hours in and not really know where to turn if it doesn't grab you straight away.
Absolutely, it needs to be rock solid to make to really add some value to the game.
I mean, that said, I have played through the first 3 hours of the game, and little moments here and there were a bit sort of off-putting, but on the whole, it actually seems incredibly solid. And the gunplay is incredibly slick. Like, you almost wouldn't believe that Wolfenstein's been away for, started 35 years ago, and God knows when the last good one came out. It was a while. So
It's been a while, yeah.
Wolfenstein: New Order. Hopefully, it doesn't get bogged down in janky narrative, but it's looking cool.
Absolutely.